excellent leadership that the city of Eureka has already demonstrated, and not rely on a solution that requires that you wait for something that really doesn't exist right now and won't exist unless a lot of efforts are taken to solve the immediate problem. So there is a housing crisis in Humboldt County, and I urge the Board of Supervisors to put it on their agenda and consider it as soon as possible, and then follow up with the good work of focused strategies, which is not exclusive. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll consider that applause for all of our speakers. I'm going to close the public comment at this time. So with that closed public comment, I'll bring it back to our board and council for discussion, and start with Councilmember Atkins.
I just wanted to thank Focus Strategies for this wonderful report. I can't tell you how excited I am to be here today. I see this plan as a step-by-step program in which we can decrease and possibly eliminate homelessness in Humboldt County. One of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit was down in Santa Rosa, they started a Housing First program, I guess a year ago or so, and their homelessness rate is down 27% in that time. So I think that it really can work, and it will take time. It's not an instant panacea, but I believe if we start small with like the 30-60 idea and get our feet wet and get us rolling in this process and actually dedicate ourselves to Housing First, that will really make a big difference.
Thank you. Councilmember Cherubini.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I will also support the plan and thank Megan and the staff for all the hard work that they did to put all this together. It's really phenomenal. And I want to point out, too, that, you know, together the city and county have made a lot of progress in this area. And I really am excited about partnering more and actually following this step-by-step plan. I think it's based on actual proven practices that you've seen all across the country, and it's hard to argue that there are you know, a different approach that might come up with a different solution. So I'm in support of this, and I'm very interested in pursuing all the funding methods that you and maybe others that we haven't quite thought of yet. I just think it's a great plan, so I'm going to support it, and I'm going to throw a motion on the table on behalf of the city to receive and file the report from Focus Strategies and to schedule this for further discussion at a possible subsequent city council meeting.
Is there a second on that motion, council?
Can I ask for, I'll second it, and then could I ask for an amendment just to give a time certain on it on maybe February 2nd, our next meeting?
A time certain, oh, just at the next meeting. Yeah, that'd be fine.
All right.
Can I ask a point of clarification? I thought we weren't making any motions at this meeting, that this was going to be deferred till our next meeting for action anyway. I thought that's what Supervisor Lovelace said both our entities were doing.
Let me explain here. The board's normal procedure is to take a motion, even if it's just a report, is to take a motion to receive the report. So we've, in discussions with Chairman Lovelace yesterday and the city manager and I, we decided to go ahead and follow their lead in that and do a motion to accept the report. Normally we wouldn't do that at a council meeting, but since we're over here in their house, we're going to follow their procedures.
Thanks for the clarification.
All right. Questions?
So I agree. I support this 100%, and I'm so grateful it's finally here. Thank you so much. From what I read, this needs to be a unifying process. We need to partner. And so I would like to see us adopt it together, not at our separate meetings. So if we're bringing it back February 2nd to adopt, can we do that in the afternoon here?
If you want to make that motion, you can certainly do that.
Can I make
but
a
there's
motion on a
on the
motion?
floor right now. It's not agendized as an action item for this meeting, for us or for the board.
So I'm suggesting that we put it as an action item for February 2nd, a joint meeting.
You can ask Councilman Sherbellini if she'd like to amend your motion for that.
Want to amend your motion for that?
Are you talking about another joint meeting?
These are two separate.
Yeah,
I think we should hear from our CAO first before we.
If I may,
thank you.
Yes, you may.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Let's,
Mayor Yeager,
go ahead.
if I may. I think we've hit that point where we run into the difficulty of having this joint meeting where we have two separate decision-making bodies, and we cannot make a decision for your council, and your council cannot make a decision for our board. And so a motion, as the motion that was included within the, the recommended motion in the agenda, which I believe is the one that Councilmember Cherubellini put out there, specifies just that, we'll continue this item to our next meeting, which would be next Tuesday, a day that we each have meetings on the same day. There's a number of reasons in my mind why that might be a more appropriate move, because the council has already had multiple discussions on this issue over many weeks, and has taken the step of declaring a shelter crisis. Has had a lot more, it's been a little more primed for what we're doing here today. So there may be some slight differences in terms of, the actual step of moving forward. But either way, if we go to the route of scheduling it as a joint meeting, I believe that our two bodies should have a discussion about that first before either one makes a motion on it. Because, frankly, it would look a little odd if the council voted for a joint meeting and then our board comes and doesn't make the same motion, so.
And can I add to that then? I hear what you're saying, that you haven't had the time to look that over, or, that you need to make your own decision. However, I mean, we've been waiting for this report since September, and so I would hate for us to wait for 4 or 5 or however long it's going to take to adopt it from your end. So I would like to have some kind of an idea as to when that's going to happen and we can get started. Could that be March? Mr.
If I could, Vice Chair Bass, I believe, has a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm hearing the concerns coming from Kim. We'd like to get this going. I mean, I've been involved in the process since it started, so I'm really excited about it. And I think the difficulty is with our board, our decisions are made county-wide. So while I'm very supportive, I really appreciated what I saw today, and I'm ready. If I could vote with you guys, I'm like, yeah, I'm there. But at the same time, I recognize that Supervisor Fennell, we've had some issues brought up about Southern Humboldt. I mean, there might be some questions that they'd like at least a little time to look at. And with us meeting weekly, it is really hard on our staff. If we pick this to bring back on the 2nd, we need to check and make sure there's even room. But I think the chair is moving in the right direction. It's just there are some complications, and March. You brought up March. I don't know if that's waiting too long.
If I could perhaps, I'm sorry, Mayor Yeager.
Let me have Linda address.
I have a thought on the motion. Maybe that we say that we would like to have our meeting with you so that we could talk about this together, and then you'll have to figure it out with your administrative staff, and we have to figure it out with our administrative staff.
Can we go to your house?
If Supervisor Sundberg, I just was going to insert that I think procedurally perhaps because your body has a motion and a second on the table, it should be your own internal discussion at this point, and as long as that's there, kind of procedurally it's odd for us to all have this discussion. I'm wondering if perhaps pulling that motion back for the time so we can have a joint discussion about how we want to move forward so that we can formulate something where we can all be on the same page, as a suggestion.
This is rather awkward. Do either of you have suggestions with regards to procedural?
Well, given that there's a motion on the floor for the city council, you could either vote on that motion or have discussion amongst yourselves. I agree with our chair that it's a little awkward for the board members to insert themselves into the council's discussion about a council motion. If you did choose to table the motion in some fashion, that might be free up a little more discussion. And I believe, you've had at least one council member who's expressed an opinion about having a future joint meeting, and I see lots of hands among these 5 folks over here who might have opinions on that. So.
Well, I think the only thing to add is somewhat too is it was pretty difficult getting this meeting pulled together. I know the county has a little longer time frame in terms of getting items on the agenda than what we typically do. So, again, I think it's probably appropriate you have either the discussion among yourselves as to if you would like to have another joint meeting, or if you want to do this, separately at our own meetings.
Okay, let me handle this for him. Okay, go ahead, Marion.
If I'm understanding Melinda's motion, it's to receive the report and schedule it for further discussion at our next council meeting. Is that basically it? Yes. Okay. And so we can do that on our own, and the board can do that on their own in their own time frame. I don't see why it has to be a joint thing, because basically after we all have looked at this and decided whether we're going to sign on, then at that point, there's going to be this kind of a super group that's going to be looking at working with DHHS and HHHC and Betty Chin and everybody else, and then we can start implementing if we decide to vote on that. So I think we should just do what Melinda said, receive and file the report, and then talk about it at our next meeting to adopt it or not. That's my opinion.
Councilman Burgell.
So just as a point of clarification, as the city, we can't do anything with this document until it's been adopted by both of us. Is that correct? We can? Oh, okay. I just want to do it.
Okay, okay. Natalie, go ahead.
Well, I have a comment on the motion, given that it's pertaining to accepting this plan. I can't argue either with the fact that it reflects, proven best practices, and that's wonderful. We are in a unique situation that the county isn't really in. The city of Eureka is in a situation of having, an area where people are primarily dwelling outdoors being slated for construction activity in the not so distant future. And so that's the point that I would like to have us address on our own in our own council meeting. It really is our responsibility to handle the immediate concern of that, that process. But it's something that I don't know how I became the queen of wanting a tent city, because I definitely am not. Or being antagonistic to our police chief, because I want what he has personally expressed a need for. He has said out loud that he needs somewhere to tell people to go. And so we're in the situation of needing somewhere to tell people to go within a fairly short time frame. This plan is absolutely what I want to see happen, but it doesn't address that question. So that's for us to continue this conversation. I just want to note that this doesn't make that question go away for me. I'm extremely supportive of it. Otherwise, I think there's some good tools in here for us to consider I'm particularly interested in, the landlord incentivization component. As someone who's a property owner with no family who rents to tenants, I also want to know how to rent to people more equitably, and how I can protect, myself and my financial interests. So, I share the concern that many of the landlords who came here today spoke to, and that I'm sure many will have. So anyway, I just wanted to, say my 2 cents about the plan. I really appreciate our consultants and the county for, giving robust feedback. I know it took a long time because there are a lot of moving pieces that, that I'm not even privy to. So thank you for reviewing it so thoroughly and getting it to a point where we can all move forward. And my hope is that the Board of Supervisors will move forward on it as expeditiously as possible as well. So I look forward to the ongoing discussion. We still have a little ways to go to get to a point where we can resolve that, the next few months. So I'm in support of it.
Linda, go ahead.
Just a clarification, the motion was also included possible action, right? Okay, yes, but
There we go. Yes, I think I read it right from the,
Right.
schedule this for further discussion if necessary and possible action.
Excellent.
At a subsequent meeting. And I would hope to see that action being some kind of maybe proposed document that both bodies can agree to, that going back to Megan's rowing in the same direction, and a commitment for that.
with that, I call the question.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passed. That's your job. Sorry about that. Yeah.
So I believe,
Mark.
thank you, Mayor Yeager. I believe we have Supervisor Sundberg and Supervisor Bass, and then Supervisor Fennel.
Thank you. So this question might be for focus strategies, but what I heard from the presentation was that we need to be together on this, and if we're not together on this, it doesn't work. And I don't, I think there's a gap here. There's, even Councilmember Burgell, can we do it on our own? Yes. So, I'm just feeling like there's a huge communication gap here of where we're at, and tent city, no tent city, shelter crisis, no shelter crisis. How do we bridge that gap and do this together? I don't see it happening right here. I think we're a little ways apart, and how do we bridge that?
Well, I certainly will not attempt to speak to the meeting part. That sounds like you have people who know about that. But I think in terms of the initiatives and what you need to do, the reality is I do think the city and the county need each other, that you each have valuable resources and infrastructure, and you'll need to combine those things and to do it well to be successful. And I think what that means in this context is that to row all in the same direction and really launch this, I do think the city and the county need to adopt or endorse the plan, whatever your respective appropriate language is, to embrace what it is you're going to do, and to take the first steps if you choose to do that, which includes having a resolution that you're going to have a housing first approach and take those first steps. I actually think that then determines some of the other pieces. So for example, the tent city piece is inherently not part of a housing first strategy. The report that we referenced in our report that somebody subsequently handed out, actually the federal guidance on that topic, that's actually a great report, and I think outlines that really well. The shelter crisis piece, which I think is the other part, I actually wasn't aware of all of the moving of people indicated And I think that that is I can understand why that is has immediacy to it. But that doesn't actually change anything about what you're going to do to house people or the contents of the plan. I think that what that does, perhaps some ideas for that might be to either decide that you're not going to decide anything about that's an incredibly immediate thing, and you're focused on your vision and your strategy of actually ending homelessness or significantly reducing homelessness in the community, and that's what the plan will do for you. Or if you're going to address it, I mean, one of the things that you could do is you could consider, this, I don't even know if this is quite right or what the staff would say about this, but you could consider looking at, how the police and the city staff are working on the issue, and do you want them to reprioritize differently or not, and sort of isolate that to the city. It sounds like that's where the conversation's happening. I would say the only real danger of getting derailed, if you both endorse the plan and you both take the first steps of that plan with the Housing First policy and so on, I think the only real way to go different directions is to start spending money on things that aren't in the plan. So I think that's what I'm trying to say with that is sort of, if there's some immediate something in a particular publicly owned place in the city, and the city is already dealing with that, I know that affects the police and Parks and Rec and all kinds of folks. There may be ways to prioritize those staff time or something that helps you address that without spending money like that could be spent on housing people. So that might be a way to kind of separate those issues. And those are just my thoughts. I don't actually know the details of that, the plan to sweep people, but that's certainly something we could talk about. We may have other ideas for what you could do that wouldn't be a distraction from the plan. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And so, I mean, I guess that brings up the question for the city of Eureka is there a plan? 'Cause I don't know, to tell you the truth. Is there plans to spend money on a campground or tent place, or so if your focus strategies is what you want to spend your money on? Is that correct?
I don't want to spend any more money on focus strategies, no offense. Unless there's like a real big piece that we're missing. But this is what.
Talk about the plan,
okay.
focus strategies
so
plan,
this
not
plan.
more
Okay. Yes. The plan as it stands, that's why, at least personally, I voted in favor of bringing this back at our next council meeting so that we can accept it in our council meeting as an action item, because it's not agendized as an action item. So that's why I'm in support of it. I support it hook, line, and sinker. I was just trying to make the point that we have a separate time-specific and location-specific need to deal with on our own, related to the construction of waterfront trail amenities, et cetera. And that's something that I think we can look at some approaches to. That to me is separate from this longer term and more like financially intensive effort to house people in permanent housing, which is something that I 100% support.
And Supervisor Bass, and then myself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm hearing all this conversation, and I feel like in some ways we're kind of, we're getting lost, but I think we're looking at vision. I want to, I'm looking at the vision, and while there are some other things we can do potentially, if the city has a few things they want to do differently, we're not talking about a shelter crisis for us right now. It's not on our agenda. We're not talking about exactly the same situation, but I think we can all share the vision of this is, what's proven to work. This is what is working across the country. This is what's working in the cities and the counties that we know. And so I would be perfectly, happy to have this come back with a draft resolution for discussion with our board, knowing that a lot of our board members haven't been part of this conversation necessarily, but given what's going on in all of our parts of our districts, there's some really good stuff in here where it starts in Eureka, and this is going to go, this is countywide. I mean, you've had it in there, and, I don't see a reason to not bring it back. The reason I wouldn't choose potentially a next meeting is if our staff is, I know our staff has a lot on their plate, so I'd, I hesitate to put the date certain, but I would choose the next practicable meeting. And so I guess, and the other thing I wanted to say before, making a motion is there's a lot of conversation already happening that is synergistic to this. There's some groups meeting on Housing Trust Fund or whatever it may be called now in the future. But I was reading this document, and half of it was relating very closely to some other things that are happening. And so we are at a place right now where taking action is really important. So with that, I would move that our board receive the report and file and direct staff to bring back a draft resolution for discussion and potential action at the next meeting that is practical for our scheduling.
Second.
I don't know if that's, I was afraid, I'm looking at Philip, he's leaving, Sunday, so I don't know. He doesn't, everyone.
I do have a comment, though. It's, so I have the McKinleyville Municipal Advisory Committee, and things that affect McKinleyville have to go through that advisory committee. I know same thing with Supervisor Bone and Eureka, and I do have a message into the advisory committee to see if this is something that they want to take up, because there's homeless people in McKinleyville, and this strategy would definitely affect them. So it is something that I need to do to ask them if they want to take it up. So that would be longer than next week. So that's one of the reasons why I'm hesitant just to put something on the agenda next week and go forward. So
The date soon as it's practical?
that's why that's why I seconded your motion with practical.
Usually you second the motion, then you don't agree with me.
So we have a we have a motion and a second, and Supervisor Fennell had was on the stack. I asked if I could perhaps make a quick comment. When this first came up, the motion was made by the council that I think I made a comment that perhaps took things off in the wrong direction, which was only that when the discussion moved to a joint meeting, that that was something that perhaps we should have a discussion about a joint meeting before either one of us makes a motion to that effect. And that was what I was trying to limit that to. Regarding where the board and the council are, myself, I don't perceive that there's a whole lot of daylight there, but I think that there is fairly a recognition that there are a lot of pieces around this issue that affect the county in ways that do not affect the city. And there's a lot of ways that this affects the city in ways that are simply not our jurisdiction. And so what this is a matter of focusing our strategy. Hey, good name. But to prioritize something doesn't mean that you don't do anything else. It's a matter of saying this is our priority. Housing first is our priority. We recognize that there is a wealth of issues all around this, as we've heard from so many people, and I've just I saw a lot of pens moving up here, and I know we've all been taking notes. So many great comments that people have made regarding this that does require further discussion for each of us. In my mind, it would be ideal if we could take action on this as much as possible at the same time, whether it's the same date when we both have a meeting, or whether it was at a joint meeting. But I do understand the comment that Supervisor Sundberg made regarding the MMAC and the GMAC. So, and that we do have other entities to consult on this too. So with that, Supervisor Fennell, you had a comment?
Well, I was thinking of making a motion, and it didn't include a resolution, which would mean we could probably talk about it next week, but I'm fine with this one too, even though it'll push it out. There are some issues that we have to talk about that are not necessarily, wouldn't necessarily be high on the list at the city. And I will note that as I look through the potential funding, a lot of it is pointed directly at the county, and would also very definitely result in some kind of reprioritizing at the Department of Health and Human Services. So I certainly want our director to take a look at that and to hear how that might be brought about. So, if we were to just do it as, for further discussion at the next meeting, we could potentially look at how we would go forward as a county to come closer to this. But again, I'm fine to put it out and look at it as a resolution. I do want to make a comment. We talked a little bit about no services in Southern Humboldt. And again, I will look over here to our interim director, Connie Beck. She's already got boots on the ground, and the boots on the ground are her own. She has been out there and she's been working on this issue, and we're talking about a creation of a mini-MIST program in the Southern Humboldt area and other outlying areas. We're looking at the fact that a lot of the issues that we will be dealing with are mental health and substance abuse. So those, I can't thank her enough, and I can't show more appreciation than to say thank you so much. Another issue that I really want to bring up is we made sort of, in some regards, flippant remarks about marijuana and the fact that there was a meeting about marijuana prior to this. Well, part of the ordinance that we passed today, which will go into effect on March 1st, will really cut down on growing in houses. In fact, and that is a really important thing to remember, that this ordinance was just not about growing marijuana. It was trying to address the issues that have come about as a result of an underground economy that was poorly regulated. So, in fact, they do work together, and I do hope that in the future we're not going to see anybody growing marijuana where people should be living. And I remember when you made your presentation last time, Megan, I was hoping you could get an idea of how many houses were being used for growing marijuana indoors. And I know that that was a little, but anyway, I just want to address that. And I can support the motion that you brought forward. If we wanted to move more quickly, then I could support one, I could change it.
I was following on Supervisor Fennell's comment. And for consistency's sake with the city that we're wanting to partner with here, I'm wondering if the maker and seconder would be willing to modify the motion to just be to schedule this for further discussion and possible action at the next regular meeting. That way, it's not necessary to pull together a resolution in that time period, which is not being directed. I'm not hearing that specifically too, and that way we're on the same page, at least for this next step.
Fine with me, as long as we were able to, that's the second. I mean, the second of the,
Yes,
Yeah.
that's fine with me.
Okay. So I believe that that would be the motion as it appears in the on the agenda. Okay. Supervisor Sundberg.
Do you want to go first? Okay. So I just want to say that I'm glad that we have that straightened out, that the city can go ahead and do other things, and we don't have to have everything be completely parallel. So that's good news for me. So I was hearing in the presentation, it was like kind of an all or nothing. We have to be all on the same page or this thing won't work. So I'm glad to hear that there is some flexibility in there, and that the city can deal with your problems, you know, with moving people. I'm not aware of that whole issue, but it sounds like you have issues that you got to deal with right now. So I'm glad that this is going to be able to go forward like this. I'm very in favor of this plan. I think it's, you know, a lot of hard work that is ahead of us, but I think that from what I've heard, everyone is willing to put in that work, and it's going to be fun to do a team project like this. So thank you.
So we have a motion and a second, and a comment from Supervisor Bone.
Well, it's a great team project because it's a team problem. And it affects us all. It's the same thing. I'm on the streets of Eureka every day, and sometimes early, sometimes late. And it might be the wrong time or the right time to say this, but I think we've got DHHS staff that is reinvigorated to get this done. And I think we've already seen that. I think there's a part in there that says we have lots of extra money in our general fund. The comment was made today that we have property. I've only been here 3.5 years. I don't know where all this extra property and extra money is, but it's, you know, but I think there is money and programs that can be redirected, and I think the staff at DHHS has made a big effort in the last few months to find that and do that, and I think they look forward to working on the focus strategies. They've made a lot of comments to me and to the rest of the board, I'm sure, about how this can work in tandem with the city of Eureka. So I look forward to this happening, but it will be a team effort. Are we going to get along on everything? Hell no. Nobody gets along with everything. But the thing is, there are numbers out there that we have to remember, and I think Joel McDonough made a great statement today, and I talked with him at length about this. We have some serious addiction and mental health problems that has to be directed at the same time. So if you think you're going to take somebody out of a tent, put them in a house, and everything's going to be fixed, it's not. The case manager and the problems on the mental health are the biggest issue. And I have, you know, I work with somebody here in town that has been doing this on a regular basis, that has created the trust within those landlords, and we're going to have to create that same trust, because it's not there right now, I can tell you, because all they do is hear the problems that have happened down in the Marsh area and the homeless issue. I mean, it goes the other way too. I'm pretty, Elk River's got quite a few of them, because when they spread, they go one way or the other. What I'm saying is, they see what happens down there, and they think that's what's going to happen in their units, and that's the mentality we have to change and the mindset we have to change. And as Councilmember Atkins says, we're going to have to indemnify these guys. We're going to have to make sure they're whole if something does happen. It's going to take some money, and do not think we have a $160 million budget to go out and do that. We don't. 90-some-odd% of that is federal and state mandates that we get the blessing to put through. So we have no choice, but I think we've got the staff that's willing to work, turn over some stones. We have state representatives that were just in Sacramento last week working on the same issues. So there are some things happening, because I'm going to argue a little bit with Focus Strategies on this, because I was in Sacramento and spent 3 days early morning walking around, and there's a lot of this problem everywhere. And this wasn't down by Fishes and Loaves or anything else. This was in the general capital area, and this is it's a statewide, nationwide epidemic, and we're a little concentrated here because some of the services are based here, but I still think it's something we have to address. I think it is the single most important thing we face as a council and as a board of supervisors, and it's probably the biggest thing we can try to fix. And there's always going to be homelessness, because we have a TAP program that ships out, that's a terrible term, but that aids people to get back to their family units. And Betty does this too. We're sending between 45 and 60 people a month out of here. If you do the math, that's 500 to 600 a year. Our point-in-time counts aren't showing it. So we do have a pretty good migration into this area, and it wasn't mentioned, but we've got a migration into this area because the numbers aren't dropping.
Thank you, Supervisor Bone. And I believe our deputy clerk has a clarification.
Just to clarify, the motion is now to accept staff recommendations, is that correct?
I believe it's as written on the...
I was going to say, he was interrupted.
To receive and file the report from Focus Strategies and schedule this for further discussion if necessary and possible action at the next regular meeting.
Without
County.
the resolution.
Yeah.
She just took a
Yeah.
yes.
Just as on the agenda. So with that, we have a motion and a second. All in support?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None? Motion passes 5-0. So with that, I would like to express my great appreciation to Mayor Yeager and to the entire council for joining us here today. So.
Go ahead.
In light of your new ordinance, something to consider might be taxation to create funds for houselessness. And
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Any other final comments by council? And we are adjourned.
Thank you. And so that brings us back to our continued meeting of the Board of Supervisors. We do have, in theory, one item, which is board member reports. I'm going to ask that we just pass on those for yet again. In which case, our board meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.